Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and Josh, as many times as you ask, the answer is still no, you cannot have my baby.
All right. I guess Awesome Movie Year Junior will just have to not exist.
Nobody is more excited about babies than Josh.
Yeah, so true. Babies and children, my favorite things. And that's what we've got here in this episode. We are talking about the films of 1975 in this season. And we are here at an episode that often changes from season to season. It is sometimes our Sundance Film Festival episode, but when we are looking back further than Sundance existed, we've talked about other festivals, other major festivals. And here we're looking at the Berlin International Film Festival, the winner of the Golden Bear at that festival in 1975. It's a Hungarian film called Adoption from director Márta Mészáros. And Jason has predicted that this will be our shortest episode ever because
I'm already done with my analysis of it.
Yeah.
Josh, how did you, because you know, when we go over the lineup for each season, we all have suggestions, but this was all you, baby. How did you choose this as opposed to some other film festival?
Well,
winners?
I think I don't recall. I know in the past a few times I think we've done the Venice Film Festival for this episode, and I don't remember what it was that won Venice that I decided would not work, or it's possible Venice was not competitive this year. There's years I know where they don't actually give out a top prize that happened various times during the history of that festival. So I think I was just looking at other major festivals, and you go back that far and certain festivals either don't exist like Sundance or aren't at the level that they had become, or they don't offer winners or top prizes or whatever. So I think this seemed like the film where we could pick something that did win a major film festival that existed at the time and seemed interesting to me. Obviously, it turned out, at least on Jason's part, that this was not a particularly interesting film, but it seemed like something for us to explore beyond so many of the big name, major canonical classics that we've been talking about in this season.
So the key there was pick something from a film festival that exists.
That is a notable major film. I mean, Berlin is one of the big three festivals in Europe, along with Venice and Cannes. And this was, for example, actually, which I'll probably mention a little later, this was the first ever year of the Toronto Film Festival, for example, but it was kind of a failure in that first year. And that festival never gives out, it doesn't have a jury, it doesn't give out awards. So, I mean, that winner is never really an option for us. And, you know, most other film festivals are kind of lower tier or didn't exist. So
I'm just like Googling it, and it seems that Venice didn't happen in 1975.
there you go. Yeah,
reason.
that's it. It has kind of a bumpy history, Venice, even though that is the first, I believe, the first ever film festival to exist. So it's been around.
This sounds like a spin-off
Longer.
podcast, Venice.
Why we can talk about it for our earlier seasons. Real glimpse into the inner workings of Awesome Movie Year we're giving you here.
Yeah, wait until we get to Dave's pick and we go through his mind on how he picked Dave's pick.
I don't know if we want to really get too deep into Dave's mind on this podcast.
I agree with that.
And this is a notable film. I mean, I think Márta Mészáros as a filmmaker is not particularly well known here in the US, not someone that I had heard of before, or you, Jason, I imagine, had heard of her before.
Josh, how dare you, sir? I, of course, had watched all three of the Diary trilogy that she had made in the 80s, so I don't know what you're talking about.
So Jason hadn't heard of her before either. But
speaking of which, when I went to Letterboxd to look this movie up, you know who's watched this movie? The three of us. That's
all right. We're trailblazers.
There are plenty of reviews of this. I mean, especially because it was given a big restoration a few years ago. It was released on Blu-ray, 4K, whatever, by the Criterion Collection. It's streaming on the Criterion channel, as we all watched it there, if you are interested in watching it after our ringing endorsement of it.
Josh was so into it, he learned Hungarian to give you actual reviews from the
I
time
did not,
of it.
but Márta Mészáros was the first ever Hungarian female director to make a feature film. And this movie was
cool.
the
We're
first
good with that.
movie.
Yeah, we like that.
Yeah. And this film was the first movie directed by a woman to ever win the Golden Bear at the Berlin International Film Festival. So it is a landmark film, and she is a major world filmmaker, even if we are not familiar with her, and a lot of American filmgoers are not familiar with her.
It's where we've got her and Chantal Ackerman breaking new ground in this year. So it's interesting to go back and look at that.
Right. And it is interesting to see women breaking through in this era like that, given that it's still, a struggle, that representation is still not at the level that, it should be for balance now. And it was difficult. I watched an interview with Márta Mészáros that's part of like the supplemental features on Criterion that she gave at the Berlin Festival in 2019 when they premiered the restoration of this. And she was married to another Hungarian film director. And she said early on when she was making movies, the only way that she kind of was able to do it was that people thought her husband would show up and be the real director. And kind of were like, oh, we'll let her do her thing until he shows up. And of course, that was not what happened. But certainly, facing some obstacles there.
She was married to two different directors in her life, and her sons have been directors of photography on her films.
Yeah, that's a nice little family affair. So this film did premiere at Berlin in 1975. It also played at the 1975 Chicago International Film Festival, the Toronto International Film Festival, as I said, in 1976, which was the first ever edition of that, and the New Directors New Films Festival in New York City in 1976. It was the Hungarian submission to the Oscars for Best Foreign Language Film, but it did not receive a nomination. And again, according to Márta Mészáros in that interview, this was the first year that socialist countries in the sort of Soviet bloc had participated and sent films to the Berlin Festival.
Dave, you're the expert on geopolitics and economics. Anything to add there?
I think that's cool.
Thank you, Dave.
Expert. I told you, Josh.
Some interesting stuff here, I guess. So, I mean, as Jason kind of alluded to with my non-speaking of Hungarian, this was not a film that was really reviewed at the time that it was released in English. It was not released in the US, other than playing those couple film festivals here. There was not a commercial release of this in the US until much, much later on home video, and really not much attention given to this film until it had that restoration in like 2019. So a movie that was not heavily covered or barely even covered at all. So I only have one review here, in comparison to my usual. And I did not go on that deep dive, unlike in our Chantal Ackerman episode on John Dielman, where I did find some reviews in French that were translated. I could not, my research skills did not lead me to any Hungarian reviews. Although again, in that interview, Márta Mészáros claimed that the Hungarian critics were very critical and very negative about the main star of this film, Katalin Berek, but that critics in the West were more receptive to her kind of subdued acting style in this film.
Well, Josh, while you were saying that, I was looking up reviews, and I found our Letterboxd reviews, me, you, and Dave, that we could go over since you're lacking.
There's other reviews on Letterboxd and some reviews of the Criterion DVD when it was released. But the one review I did find from the time is from Vincent Canby in the New York Times, who did review it when it played at New Directors New Films in 1976. So he said, "Adoption is very much a woman's movie. Though its title has specific reference to Kata's actions after her lover refuses to give her a baby, the film has even more to do with surrogate relationships, particularly with the friendship that develops between Kata and a teenage girl who has been put into a state home by her family. It is also about women without men, or with men who don't quite measure up, in a world still dominated by men. The style is introspective, or at least as introspective as it is possible to be in a movie that does not attempt to crash through to the subconscious. In the center of the screen most of the time, in the close-ups favored by the director, is the fine, angular, expressive face of Miss Berek. Adoption, which is Miss Mészáros' fifth feature, never explodes with the unexpected insights that separate great films from good ones. It takes no exciting chances. Rather, it records the details of one woman's life with the kind of deliberate care and intelligence that one can recognize without being especially moved.
That's makes me think back of like Tokyo Story or something, and which is obviously considered like an all-time great and everything like that. So, and that doesn't really take chances from a storytelling standpoint, I would say, right? Would you agree with that, Josh?
I suppose it doesn't take chances, but I mean, it's a unique style of storytelling, I think, that Ozu perfected, and maybe it seems less radical to us watching it now than it would have at the time.
Yeah, I don't agree with the answer here, but I'm not sure I agree with how he worked out the equation, because there were plenty of small, lovely movies that just kind of meander through, and this one I just don't think adds up all the way to get you to that next level. But I don't think that's because of the filmmaking style per se.
Right. I mean, I agree that this is it's certainly a small film, and I think that's deliberate, but it does feel a bit meandering. And there are a lot of moments in this film to me where I was like, I'm not really sure what the purpose of this is or how this feeds into the themes or the central narrative of the film. And it's kind of intriguing at the time, but I agree with him that it kind of, especially at the end, it adds up to like, huh. And it doesn't necessarily, to me, it didn't feel emotionally affecting, even though I could kind of admire what she's attempting.
Do you one note I sometimes get on screenplays, which I think is I don't always agree with, but do you feel like it's episodic, Josh?
A little. I mean, I feel like that's a common criticism of films where they're a series of little events. I don't know. I felt like this had a pretty clear through line with the two main characters and their desires. Kata, who has this desire to have a child, and Anna, the teenager from the group home, who wants to marry her boyfriend. And both of those are resolved by the end. So, I mean, in that sense, they're introduced at the beginning and resolved at the end of the film. So, I mean, that's a full-on arc within the film as a whole.
I guess to go a little further with that, right? So the younger girl in the group home, she comes to Kata's house, right? Yeah. At one point, and then and she's like, "Hey, I have a boyfriend. Can we bang here?" That's what she says. Can we bang here? Because I can't bang him at the group home.
It's interesting for this Hungarian film from 1975 to use language like that.
Yeah. But anyway, she's looking for some privacy with her boyfriend, and she can't have it in the group home. So she's like, "Hey, lady, I've just seen walking down the block, but never talked to. Can we hang out here?" And then she leaves. And then her friend comes over looking for her. And I don't even know if we ever see the friend in the rest of the movie, but she just has this like crazy conversation with Kata about how difficult life is. And it never really goes anywhere beyond that, right?
Yeah, I think you do see that character again at the end, just in the background in the wedding scene. But she doesn't have any lines or anything at that point. But I thought that scene it is a little weird that that's really the only scene we get with that character. But I thought that scene was really powerful. She reads this letter that she's written to her mother, expressing all this anguish about how she was abandoned and how she doesn't ever want her mother to contact her again. And I think it shows, or is maybe meant to show, that for whatever reason, Kata seems like someone who is receptive to helping these girls, or maybe because she is middle-aged and lives alone, they feel like she has some sort of affinity with them. I think that's kind of what they're going for there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. That is like the language of that is powerful, right? And it almost made you want to learn more about that character, which we never get to do. But it's also a little strange. I mean, to be like, "Hey, again, I've never met you before. I'm looking for my friend. Let me read this letter to you about how much I hate my mom."
Right. I mean, I think what it is that these are people who've grown up without parents, really, right? and
they're looking for some type
Right.
of parental
right,
figure.
and presumably they're not getting that at the group home. That the adults who work there are not really sympathetic to them or not really giving them the time and attention that they want. And this is someone who seems like she might be receptive to it, or maybe seems like she's looking for an emotional connection too, given that she's kind of alone all the time.
I think that's fair, Josh. Man, you are zoned into the Hungarian zeitgeist of the 70s, sir.
I try. So, I mean, as we've clearly established, none of us had seen this film. None of us had seen any other Márta Mészáros films or were familiar with her work at all. So this is kind of a new discovery for us all around.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I just think like it just kind of went doo, doo.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated it a little more than that, but I it did feel it was, my response was kind of muted. And I did go, and I didn't have time to watch more of her features, a lot of which are not really available, but Criterion has a couple others. But I did watch a short film that Criterion has, again, in the sort of supplemental features of this, from 1964, called Blowball, which is just a 20-minute kind of shapeless odyssey about this kid in a city wandering around during the day, and parents who kind of don't really pay close attention to him. And that's even more if you want to use that as a critical term,
I love that.
than this one. But I mean, it was pleasant, and it has some beautiful shots of the city. And this movie also has really nice black and white cinematography. But
I agree.
it didn't really reach me either, even less so, I think, than this one did.
But Josh, on Adoption, what would your musical review be of it?
It would be more like, I think. I can't wait to start a whole scale based on these noises.
Dave, do you want to chime in?
Dave is
just sounded like a Wookiee in a bear trap or something like that.
All right. Do you have anything else on the background of Adoption that you want to mention, Jason?
Well, I mean, Josh, you mentioned that other short film there, and I mean, look, we're all learning on this one, and it seems from what we have researched that she deals with a lot of the same themes often. I have a quote from her where she says, "I tell banal, commonplace stories, and then in them, the leads are women. I portray things from a woman's angle," which maybe isn't the case with that one about the kid, but there is a lot of stuff about parents and relationships and just the idea of kind of maybe neglect or not having that closeness with their parents.
Right. And I think from looking at, again, just like Letterboxd and the Márta Mészáros super fans who are reviewing her work on there, that you're right, that short film that I watched is a bit of an outlier, and that most of her work is about women, single women and stuff like that. And in the interview that I watched, she mentioned how in Hungary at the time, there was so much divorce and so many. One of the things that struck me about those kids in the group home is that they seem to all, or the ones that we meet, they keep mentioning that it's not like their parents are dead or whatever. Their parents just were like, "Nah, we don't want you," and they dropped them off there. And she mentions in that interview that was like a thing that was happening a lot at the time.
Yeah, we kind of see that with the character who gets married, when like her parents are like, "Here are the rules. If you marry her and it doesn't work out, you keep her. We don't want her back."
Right. That is essentially what it is. And that was apparently allowed. The state was allowing that and was supporting that in a socialist regime. So, that's an interesting thing that is in contrast to today.
Well, socialism, everyone's supposed to share the wealth. So here they're sharing the kids, I guess. The responsibility is to raise the children.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly true, I think. And the state is taking that responsibility. So we'll come back and see what else we have to say in general about adoption. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1975, we're talking about Berlin Film Festival Golden Bear winner Adoption. And Jason, I realized that you said before actually saying anything that you'd ran out of your thoughts on this film, but do you have any other observations, or were there any favorite moments of yours?
I seem to have so many thoughts that I wasn't even aware of, Josh. I'll tell you what I liked. I thought she did a really good job with a lot of the shots, just changing the subject of the shots very smoothly. So you're starting on one character and then you're just kind of trickling over to another character. And I'm not talking about like rack focuses or anything, just like foreground, foreground, foreground. And I thought that was really effective filmmaking technique. And I just, from a story standpoint, like you're saying, like I think we all just wanted it to hit that next level, but it kind of stayed in neutral from the beginning to the end. However, a story of a single woman in her 40s in Hungary who wants to have a baby is like a really interesting kind of piece, especially for this time. And I think the scene with like the doctor where he's like, yes, you can have a baby. You're healthy and you're only 42. Why not? Like it seems progressive for that period of time, I'd say.
Right. And I think maybe part of that is the perspective of the socialist government, as we were saying with the group homes for children. Maybe that was something where it was like encouraged. And it was interesting to me too when she has that scene where, right, she's single. She doesn't say she's planning to get married or anything like that, but there's no kind of patriarchal judgment of like, well, but you don't have a husband or whatever. And he just asks her, like, have you been using contraception in your sexual encounters or whatever? And he's not judging her for having had those sexual encounters or anything like that, even though she's single. And so I agree that that seemed either progressive or just kind of reflective of the very different perspective of the government in a country like that at the time versus, say, in the US or whatever.
Right. So, it just is, like I said, we kind of start somewhere and it just kind of stays there. The other thing I thought was interesting is like the group home that they live in is like really, they're really nice people to them and like supportive. And like usually when you see a movie about like an orphanage or some, group home, it's always like, we got to get out of here. This is the worst situation possible. But they seem to want the best for these people. And when Anna wants to get married, I think she's probably like 16 or 17,
Yeah, I think
right?
that's
Like
the idea.
and they're like, hey, we got to make sure your parents are on board. And we actually think this will be good for you. And, it seems like they take adult steps to work on this issue.
Right. Yeah. I don't think when those girls from the group home are gravitating toward Kata, it's not, oh, we've been abused and we need you to save us or something like that. It's just they want a space.
More.
Yeah. Or they want to be treated as equals, whether that's Anna wanting somewhere where she can bang her boyfriend or the other girl wanting the respect to be able to express herself about her feelings about her mother and being abandoned, where she says that, the principal of the group home has told her she can't send that letter that she has written because it's too harsh or whatever.
Right. So maybe that's a little different, right? Like they're respectful, but also don't want to cause any conflicts, it sounds.
Right. But they're not being abused. And again, it's not squalid conditions. When Kata goes there to try to find Anna and she's kind of wandering around the home, it looks like everyone is perfectly, they're not being mistreated or anything like that. They have adequate facilities and stuff. And I mean, it's such a basic thing for us to be like, surprisingly, they're not abused, but I guess that's like the standards that we have for stuff like this.
I mean, but also just like from, our knowledge of film, right? That's what you see in a lot of these. And I'm not even saying that as like a bad thing, like you need conflict, right?
Sure.
And maybe here is like, maybe that's one of the issues here is there's not enough conflict. And we get to the wedding scene at the end and they do get married and you can see like they're already fighting. And you're like, yeah, maybe this is where the movie should have started with 2 16 or 17-year-old kids getting married. And the story should have been like, hey, you're too young to get married. And this is what happens.
Right. And it was interesting to me that the goal of Kata is not, I think you imagine maybe with the title and with, again, what we're familiar with from other movies. I think of like Kolya, the movie that we watched.
Yeah, where you just trounced the little kid who was great and you just were like, I hate you because you're a child and you deserve no credit for being a good actor.
I did dislike that child. But I mean, the point being that that's a movie where it's like, here's this middle-aged person who's kind of a loner, and here's this young kid who, doesn't have parents, and they're going to bond, and then they're going to, kind of want to be together. And you imagine that maybe Kata And Anna will have that kind of relationship. I mean, she's older than the kid in Kolya, but she also doesn't have, she doesn't have parents. She doesn't have anyone, an adult figure in her life to look up to. And you think maybe she's going to bond with Kata and like move in or something. And that's going to be the child that she's going to raise for like another year. But that's not what happens.
Yeah, but she does say like, hey, the reason I've come around on adoption is because of my relationship with you.
Right. That's from Kata's perspective, but from Anna's perspective, like multiple times she's like, I'm done with parents. Like you don't, you're not going to be my mom. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Now, Josh, who is an adult figure you look up to?
It's you, Jason.
Well, I mean, we didn't really need to even vocalize that because it's so obvious, but I just didn't know if there were any others in your life.
I have parents who who love me. So, I am not like Anna. I'm not writing a letter to my estranged mother or something like that. So
I know your mom listens, and I just want you to know, Dale, I'm not trying to fill any void. I'm just supporting a friend.
Yeah, I doubt she's going to listen to this episode on this Hungarian film.
Or anybody else, perhaps.
I hope people will. And I mean, this is a movie that you can watch on Criterion. It's easily accessible. And then, people will give it a shot, I would hope. So,
right. I mean, I think we both agree where it falls short. It just kind of just peters out. Like after the first few scenes, it's not bad. She has this kind of lover who's married. And she wants to have his kid, but she doesn't care. She actually tells him, don't leave your wife and everything like that. And just the stories just kind of stay where they began, I felt like, other than like, oh, I've come around on adoption.
Right. Yeah, that's true a little bit. And that was another, though, representation like with the doctor, where it's treated in this very matter-of-fact way. And she's having this long-term affair with this married guy. And she seems happy to keep just doing it that way. And he stays with his wife or whatever. And she's just like, hey, I just want to have a kid. Why don't you help me out with that? Like, it's not really a big deal. And he doesn't get mad about it per se. He's just like, no, I don't want to do
that. He doesn't seem happy. And, when she goes and she visits him and there's the scene between Kata and the wife, she doesn't seem happy, So, I mean, I think that's a recurring theme in this film. And from what we've researched in, many of her films is the place of women in society back then and how it was easy to be unhappy.
Right. And I think that scene where she visits her lover's wife is one where you do see that patriarchy asserting itself, because the wife says she's kind of jealous of Kata for having a career and her children are now older and they don't really need her every day. And Kata is like, oh, well, why don't you go work? You could totally do that. And the husband just shoots it down. And, that's the end of the story of that.
That's what I mean. All the stories just kind of end
right
where they start.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the end of the story in that you get the sense that like there's no more discussion of this issue, right? There's nothing that's going to play out. But yeah, I agree, especially in that wedding scene, because we've spent the whole movie with Kata's efforts to get permission for Anna to marry this boyfriend who seems like a nice guy, right? And then as soon as they get married and they're happy for like a few minutes or whatever, and everyone's dancing, and then you do see them having this argument or whatever, and he kind of grabs her and you wonder if he's going to be violent, and she looks very unhappy. And then that's the last we see of her, is that shot of her face and she's unhappy. It's like the end of The Graduate or something, right?
Yeah. And I just wasn't clear. Like, was she saying like, oh, I regret getting married? Like, because we don't hear any of their conversation at that point. Or is it like, hey, I'm just tired and I don't want to dance? Like, you will dance with me. I don't know what it was, I think we could have used a little more information there.
Right. And we don't really get a huge sense of that guy. I mean, he is supposed to be older. I think he's
Sunil. Yeah, he's like 22 or 23.
Right. He says he's older, and I think he has a job and he lives with his family. So he's not an orphan. He hasn't been abandoned or whatever. They're meant to move in with his family once they get married. So there's no sense that he's like been abusing her or pressuring her into this marriage or anything like that. But
in fact, the opposite, it seems.
Right. She's very, very eager to do this. And that's why Kata decides to help her, because she cares about, she comes to care about her, and this is what's important to her. So she's going to help her achieve it.
Right. I got nothing else, Josh. If you want to rate this thing, I'm into it.
Yeah, let's give it a rating out of 5 adopted children. I don't know.
group homes.
5 group homes? Sure, let's do that.
Sure. I gave it 2.5. Like I said, obviously very, a fine craftsmanship here, I would say. But just from a story standpoint, like nothing kept me invested here.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm going to give it 3 group homes out of 5. But I'm kind of with you. I admired the craftsmanship of it. And I thought it was an interesting glimpse into an era and culture that I'm not familiar with. But it did seem like a bit tough to fully engage emotionally with the story. So, Dave, did you have any other thoughts on this film that you wanted to share with us?
I did notice that there was a lot of animals in the background, either barking or squawking in like almost every scene, and like they're not on a farm. Like I thought that was kind of weird, but no, my real other thought is that the score rules. I love the music in this film, and that kind of bumped it up from 2.5 to 3 for me. So I'm going with a 3 for my rating, 3 group homes. But yeah, great score, and I believe the composer worked with her on a bunch of other films, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I'm sure that's true. And I agree. The sound design too. There's a bunch of scenes where there's like kind of background sounds or whatever that give you a sense of place or what's going on around them that I kind of noticed that was clearly deliberate. So
Yeah.
Again, going to Jason to what you said about the craftsmanship here, I think you can see her skill as a filmmaker technically, even if maybe we feel like there's a distance between us and the character.
Yeah, and this is maybe not the best comparison because it's a different time, but you think of like, because Josh, you're talking about like a time and a place and a social system and looking into that. And that made me think of Kristen Mungiu's film that we covered, 4 months, 3 days, however many hours were in the title
weeks,
of it.
3 weeks, 2 days.
Right, that one. And, I feel like that has such a thrust from a narrative standpoint that continues the momentum throughout. And I just wanted a little more of something like that.
Right. And I think that's not a bad comparison. I mean, that's an Eastern European film. It's a Romanian film, but it's, this is the same region. And that movie is from much later, but it takes place in a time period that's closer to this. And it's looking at a similar kind of culture. So I think it's a reasonable comparison. And that is a movie with a much more urgent plot, let's say.
Right. Right. And that's, again, a different style, different thing. But
yeah, that's true. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of adoption. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1975, we are talking about Berlin International Film Festival Golden Bear winner Adoption from filmmaker Márta Mészáros. And as I said, the legacy of this movie for a long time, I think in the US at least, was that it wasn't really all that accessible until they did this 4K restoration of it that premiered once again at the Berlin International Film Festival in 2019. And that's what we were able to watch on the Criterion channel, which is where it is if you want to check it out. And that Criterion also put out on DVD. So I think that kind of led to a resurgence or maybe an initial surge in interest for Márta Mészáros' work here in the US where people weren't really familiar with her.
Yeah, we knew nothing about her before this. So one thing when I was looking it up, Josh, is she, when I was researching her, it said that she a lot of the time, there's a lot of autobiographical stuff, which we kind of talked about here, but that she also combines documentary footage. And I think that would have been some interesting stuff to maybe break this up a little bit, but I don't know how that would have worked in here. I guess in a lot of our other projects, she does.
Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe just that there's realism here. I mean, we have the factory where Kata works, and it may very well have been shot at a real factory with some real factory workers. I'm not really sure. And in that short film that I watched, I mean, the kid, I think, is an actor, and there's dramatic scenes in it. But as he's kind of wandering around the city, it does have a documentary feel, and it seems like she's captured some real people going about their daily business along with the actor that she's following.
The name of the first movie that she directed was in 1968. It was called The Girl. That's that was when she became the first Hungarian woman to direct a movie, Josh. In the 80s, she made a trilogy that I had alluded to: Diary for My Children, which won the Grand Prix at Cannes, and then Diary for My Lovers and Diary for My Mother and Father.
Yeah, and a couple of those are on Criterion. I think not all 3 of them, but 2 of them. I don't remember which 2. So her stuff is semi-accessible. I was looking at, she's still alive and she's still been working as recently as 2017. That was when her last feature film was made called Aurora Borealis. And I was looking at that and it's on like Tubi. So you can watch her other films if you want.
Tubi rules. What's the last thing you watched on Tubi?
Probably the Stepford Wives for Awesome Movie Year, I would say.
I just watched Barbershop on there last night.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff on Tubi that is not available anywhere else, which is interesting.
So just, Josh, you mentioned Stepford Wives. Dave, you mentioned Barbershop. I watched Moment of Contact, the documentary about a potential UFO sighting in Brazil. So what a cross section. Tubi.
Yeah, there's all
for all your viewing needs with commercials.
All sorts of movies made for $0 with people who don't know what they're doing. You can find so much of that on Tubi and nowhere else.
Josh, Katalin Berek, who played Kata, was in over 40 films and television shows. And László Szabó, who played Yoska, her lover, acted in over 120 films and was the director and screenwriter, had 7 movies in Cannes throughout the years.
Yeah, he has had quite a career and mostly worked in France. Again, that in that interview that I watched, she talked about how he moved to France as I think as a teenager and was there at the beginning of the New Wave. He made a bunch of films with Jean-Luc Godard. He's worked with Costa Gavras and Eric Rohmer and Francois Truffaut and Olivier Assayas and all these major filmmakers in France. And he was actually in a Truffaut film that we did an episode on, The Last Metro, although I don't recall specifically his presence in it, but he was in that movie.
Another awesome movie year mystery.
Yes. And she also mentioned Katalin Berek was apparently a major stage actor in Hungary, in addition to the film and TV roles that she had.
There we go. I'm out.
I was trying to find an info, and here's a name to mispronounce, but Gyöngyvér Vigh, maybe, who is the actress who plays Anna, the teenager. She has like 3 or 4 other credits on IMDb, none past 1979. So I'm not sure what she did later in life. I didn't find anything else about her online.
You didn't like look on Instagram and be like, why did you marry Szabó?
Right. I was wondering about that. That's the actress from The Hunt that I found. And I think too, we talked recently about in Jean Dielman, the actor who played her son. I found his Instagram too, but it looks like she's either not on social media or not that I was able to discover by.
If you are divorced from Sano, slide into my DMs.
So, Jason, do you have a favorite Hungarian film?
I like Goulash, which is not a film, but it's like a stew.
What about Schnitzel? I've noticed that this was the second movie in this season that has a mention of Schnitzel after Jean Dielman.
Schnitzel and women's place in society, trying to break through. When we come up with themes, Josh, these are what we're looking for.
Yeah, we definitely thought about Schnitzel. So,
what's your favorite?
Well, I looked this up actually because I thought I would bring it up. So, I love Sunset by László Nemes, who is more famous for his first film, Son of Saul. But Sunset, which is his second movie, was my #1 movie of the year in I think it was 2018, the year that it came out, and is just a fascinating look into into a time and place that I'm not familiar with. It takes place on the eve of World War I in Hungary, and the way he shoots his films, where he constrains his frame basically just to the main character, and you don't see really anything that is outside the frame beyond her. And in Son of Saul, that's all about the Holocaust that's going on around this character, and in Sunset, it's about all sorts of societal changes, but also a lot of things that's unclear. And it's sort of this surreal journey. And it's just amazing. It's a fantastic film. If people are curious about Hungarian movies, check out Sunset as well as Son of Saul, which is really good. There's also a 2017 film called 1945 that's set right after the end of World War II and is about a pair of Jews returning to this village in Hungary where of course, the Nazis rounded up all the Jews and took them off to concentration camps. And interestingly, what happened was basically all the shops and houses and things that the Jews owned were then given to the remaining, Christian residents of the town who've spent the last 5 years or whatever, owning these businesses and living in these homes. And then these 2 Jewish guys who are survivors come back. And it's this tension between them and these residents who aren't Nazis per se, but are like, hey, this is now my business. And it was just an interesting perspective on the aftermath of the Holocaust that I'd never seen before. So that's a good film too.
Yeah, that does sound good. Obviously, this is not a filmmaking country we know much about, Josh. So this is good for us to dig deep into it. I think I might have to watch Kopeckuja, Josh. From 1981, a Hungarian band plays American rock and roll and blues hits with great enthusiasm and passion, but success seems to avoid them.
All right. Yeah, I don't know that film. I was surprised when I was looking on Letterboxd, like, how many films have I seen in Hungarian? And there were like 10 of them or something. That was a higher number than I would have expected.
Since Jason picked one that he hasn't seen, I'll just say I've been trying to get around to watching White God for a long time now. That seems like a movie I'd love.
Yeah, I have seen that. And I remember being really excited about it and being a bit disappointed in the actual experience of it. But I know you love dogs and dogs that murder people. So,
yes.
How about Mephisto, Josh? You ever seen that?
No, I haven't seen that. What is that?
It's a movie.
Thank you, Jason, for that insight.
Unlike goulash, which is a stew.
Maybe you could eat goulash while watching a Hungarian film.
Oh my God, that sounds good.
So that's Jason's afternoon plan right there. Any other thoughts on the legacy of adoption you want to mention?
Josh? No.
All right. So that is adoption. And that is
literally every note I had, we've gone through.
I think we did a good job of it. So pat on the back for us. That's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Adopt us online and on social media.
Please be nice. We just want a home. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. You can also find me at Eat This Comedy on Instagram. That's also a website. Go for Jason on Letterboxd. You got to read my review on adoption.
Yeah, that's a must read right there. Some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I'm also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter and on Letterboxd. And you can listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and check out the Produced by David Rosen Patreon for a bunch of bonus content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year. And I'll be posting right around the time this comes out a soundtrack to a film called Jacqueline that I scored that you can watch on Tubi.
Tubi. All right.
Dave, plug your new album, man.
Yeah, and my, speaking of White God and dogs, crazy dogs, my new album, The Pup Pups, which will also be out around the time this comes up, which is a comedy novelty album of songs about dogs and cats and is absolutely ridiculous.
You're a regular Weird Al Yankovic.
I think that's really the highest compliment that Dave could ever hope to receive.
Yeah, pretty much.
Again, I'm just going by hair here, Josh.
Okay, so what is it, our next episode?
Josh, it's the Best Picture winner of 1975. And as we have already showcased, there are so many good movies of this year that this one really had some tough competition to beat. But it's an all-time classic. It's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by our friend Milos Forman with our other friend, Jack Nicholson.
So many friends of ours.
And our new friend, Brad Dourif.
Tune in next time for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And thanks for
Say
listening.
hi to your friend, Louise Fletcher.
Thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Do you want me to put an advertisement in here right now?
Maybe just some more.
Hey, fans of Awesome Movie, yeah, you want some awesome records? Come down to the Pink House on Decatur Boulevard. Can you find your way through it? Neither can I. Rick's Racks Records. We got records, and you're going to pay what I tell you to.
It's going at the end of the episode for
has,
sure.
Has he ever heard that impression, Dave?
I
Would he
don't
be
think
flattered
so.
or offended?
Oh, he'd probably not understand it at all.
He'd be like, what? Huh? My Bluetooth is still in my ear. Leave me alone. Hey, friends, want to return your records to Rick's Racks? Fuck yourselves. Once we sell it, you fucking keep it. Rick's Racks Records, the Pink House, Decatur Boulevard.